For those of you guys that are new to my channel, I own an accounting firm, and that accounting firm has cracked 340 customers and 24 employees. It keeps growing, man. And what I realized is that would make my accounting firm one of the bigger accounting firms in the country. Not the big, nowhere near the biggest. It's probably in the top 10%, but it's not in the 1%. And the difference between top 10% and 1% is drastically humongous different, right? All right, let's check out this Ted Cruz video where he's taking a victory lap over the no tax on tips. This should have been a thing.
Madam President.
The senator from Texas.
You know, I remember as a kid in Sunday school thinking what it would have been like to live in Israel in the age of the apostles, in the time of miracles. And yet, perhaps we have been transformed to another time of miracles. Yesterday, I was at the White House where President Trump signed into law bipartisan legislation, my legislation, the Take It Down Act, that I authored with Senator Amy Klobuchar to protect women, to protect teenage girls, to protect young people online from non-consensual intimate images. We saw both parties come together and pass landmark legislation. And just a moment ago, 24 hours later, we saw the same thing happen. And so I thank my colleague from Nevada for moving for this to pass by unanimous consent.
Unanimous.
And I want everyone to reflect on what you just saw happen, because it is...
Great point. It's been a long time since everybody in politics, all of our politicians agree on something.
Is consequential. Last year, in the midst of the presidential campaign, President Trump at a rally in Las Vegas announced his policy proposal of no tax on tips. And Madam President, you will recall that the week after he announced that, he came and had lunch with the Republican senators, and he told us the backstory of where the idea came from. And he said he was sitting at a hotel in Las Vegas getting ready to go to his rally, and he said he was having lunch there, and he said a waitress came by, and he said she was beautiful, which I believe him. And he said she was complaining about the burden and the paperwork of paying taxes on tips and how challenging it was. And he said he pulled out a pad of paper and he just wrote on the pad of paper, no tax on tips. He said, what do you think of this? She said, great. And he went to the rally and he announced it. And as he told us, the entire crowd went nuts. Now, I got to say, when he announced that policy, I thought that was policy genius. The next week, I drafted legislation to implement no taxes on tips. And I introduced it in the Senate the very next week. And within days, both senators from Nevada joined my bill as co-sponsors. As the senator from Nevada just described, she told me on the floor, she said, 25% of all workers in the state of Nevada are tipped workers. And this is common sense, bipartisan tax reform. Look, I think we ought to be fighting for waiters and waitresses. We ought to be fighting for bartenders, taxi cab drivers, Uber drivers. We ought to be fighting for beauticians and nail salon workers.
Come on,
we ought to be
say
fighting
barbers.
For all the men and women who are working and working hard. We ought to be...
Barbers never get mentioned. I'm just messing. Notice he didn't say Starbucks cashier. I'm just messing. Don't come at me. But I'm kind of not. Like I gotta tip you because you grabbed my muffin for me. You know, like I'll go to like one of these festivals where they have, you know, the tents and stuff, and I'll buy like dog treats for my dog, and they want to tip. Like I thought that was a service thing. You know what I mean? And I get it. You got my money, you grabbed my money, you got me the muffin, but I don't know. I just feel like it's tip culture in America has gotten insane. And I'm a barber, and I tip well, but sometimes it's like, damn, here too? There was one that really took me out, bro. I forget what it was, but that shit, when the tip thing popped up, I remember being shook. Like, damn, here too?
We got to be fighting for casino workers. Sorry to leave them out. As a longtime poker player, I certainly don't want to leave them out.
Yeah.
But we ought to be fighting for blue-collar workers across this country. And I will say I've urged the House of Representatives, I've urged the White House, that we should take up no taxes on tips in the House and pass it. And I said, look, if the House passes it, I think there's a very real chance the Senate will pass it. It's bipartisan legislation. And what we just saw is the Senate passing no tax on tips 100 to nothing. Every Democrat voted yes, every Republican voted yes, And by the way, the backstory, just kind of pulling the curtain back on how this process operates. The way the process operates is when you're seeking to pass something by unanimous consent, you circulate what's called a hotline, and every senator gets the chance to say, are you going to object? And on the Republican side, every senator said, nope, goodbye me. And on the Democrat side, every senator said, nope, goodbye me. And so this is now passed, and we're sending it to the House of Representatives. Here's the good news. With what we just saw now, the certainty
I got
that
you,
we
Nate,
will
if you're still
see
on.
no tax on tips become the law of the land, I think is very close to 100%. As the senator from Nevada mentioned,
Yeah, so I guess he drew up the legislation, wrote up the legislation for it, for the bill for it, and it has gotten passed. And so I think this is what you guys need to know. So you have to track all your tips, cash and digital. There's been a time where especially barbers, because I'm in the barbering industry, it's just all mashed together. Well, now it better not be, because $25,000, for me, I'm at the top tax bracket. So if you're a barber let's just say you're a barber that makes $100,000 a year, and of that 100,000, okay, of that 100,000, let's say 25,000, and this sometimes it's more than this. This is very likely a very likely situation. Of that 25,000, of that 100,000, 25,000 is tips. Okay. Well, let's just say, because we have a progressive tax bracket, right? You know, for the first 10K, you might pay 0% in taxes. For the next 20, from 10 to 25. Actually, let me give you guys a real case scenario. What did I do here? Oh shit. Hold on, guys. Let me log in here. Okay. Show me the federal tax bracket, USA. So check this out. So I'm gonna zoom in so you guys can see the actual numbers. So from 10%, so from 0 to 11,925, you pay 10% in taxes. Okay. Now, there's automatic deductions that you get up to a certain point and all that good stuff, right? People think that if you make, let's say you make $30,000, that you're gonna pay 12% on all 30,000. No. For the first 11,900, you only pay 10%. From 11,925 to 30,000, you would then pay 12%. But if you're at $100,000, right, that would mean from 48 to 100, you're paying 22%. From 11 to 48, you're paying 12, and then from 0 to 11.9, you're paying 10%. And so what I would do is I would ask, what would be the effective tax rate for an income of 100,000? And it might really break this down. Let's see. Assumed after deductions, and it did. So the $15,000 standard deduction for single filers. So it breaks it down. Look how amazing this is, bro. 10%. So you're going to pay $1,100 on your first $12,000. That's going to be your tax bill, guys. So it's going to break it all down. Your effective tax rate is 17%. It's not 22% because you make 100 grand. It's 17% because of each of these brackets. Okay. So, by the way, if you are self-employed, check this out. So that's your federal tax rate is 16.91%. Okay. And then you have state tax, and then you have property taxes, and then you have what's called employee or self-employed taxes, right? So check this out. Let's say you don't own a home. People say, I don't pay property taxes, I don't own a home. Trust me, your landlord is passing that on to renters as well, okay? So your rent is going to also reflect whatever property taxes are. So in higher states, a lot of times, in high property tax states like Florida or Texas, you're gonna be paying for those high property taxes. If property taxes were lower, your rents would drop, unless landlords don't care. But then they would, it's a competitive market, so whatever. So let's say your state is another 5%, right? And let's say your employee tax is another, 7.65? 7.65%. That's your FICA. That's what you're paying for Social Security, all that stuff. Well, if you're self-employed, you're not paying this, but you're paying double. You're paying 13.5% around that. Okay. So add 13 plus 5 plus 17. If you own a property, add that. What about sales tax? Guys, we get taxed like crazy in a country that for the majority of its existence didn't have federal taxes. Federal taxes are kind of a new thing, and they were only supposed to be when we were in war times because we had to raise capital to fund the war, to fund our defense as a country. But our politicians figured out a way to keep it this way, get rid of tariffs, and we get stuck with crazy bills, okay? And the more money you make, we know that 50% of Americans don't pay any taxes. 50% of Americans usually get a refund. It's another 50% that pays taxes, and it's usually the small business owners, small business owners, which a lot of times are middle class, and the wealthy. Those are the ones that are paying for everything. Okay. Now, with that being said, we need to track all of these things. And what a lot of people don't realize is that if $25,000 of your income is being taxed 16.91%, how much money are you saving there? Let me do the math here, because 25,000 times 0.1691, you would be saving $4,227 in your tax bill. So it is 100% worth it to keep track of your stuff. This is why we tell people all the time, if you're not going to do it, hire an accountant, because it should pay for itself. What you don't want to do, though, is make your accountant's job a headache. And what I mean by that is there's so many people, service workers, barbers, hairstylists, bartenders, that take tips on Cash App. Well, unless you're going to categorize every single transaction and make your bookkeeper go through that, and it's going to be impossible, because a lot of times this is what we'll do. The haircut's $20. How much you wanna pay? Oh, just run it for $30. Guess what you're gonna pay taxes on? You're gonna pay that 16.91% on the entirety of this if you run that on your Cash App. You can run 2 transactions, one for $20 and one for the $10 tip, but that's a freaking headache. You're never gonna keep up with that. This is for people who use Cash App, right? Apparently, Venmo has a business account where you can separate the two, just like Square. What I tell people is go get a Square account, because whatever you charge someone, it'll charge them, and then the tip screen will pop up. And on your reports, it'll automatically categorize what was the revenue and what was your tips. And then that way you make your accountant's life easier, and it's easy to track. And if you run it up for $25K in tips, you just saved more than $4,000. Cash App doesn't allow you to separate it yet. I think Venmo does with a business account. And just keep up with these apps, because I'm sure these apps want to stay in compliance, and they don't want to lose customers over not being able to save on tips. So I'm sure they're going to release those features. You just got to make sure you're paying attention to that so that you can save all that money. I hope you guys I hope that was helpful.